And we are live. We have 168 people, 175, 181, 190, up. $230. We'll just wait to see how many more people are going to come in before we get started. All right, so it is 11. I guess we will kick it off. Ted?
Good morning. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for being here today with us. My name is Ted Campbell. I'm Senior Vice President of Azabar Government Solutions. We have been in service helping local communities for over 25 years. We serve 400 government entities across the country. During this crisis, we have been solely focused on helping communities across the country. We have received extraordinary feedback to the webinar, and we appreciate local government officials, fire and police chiefs, health department directors, finance managers, mayors, city managers, council members, everyone on the front line of this crisis. Thank you for your service. We have over 576 people registered for this webinar. We understand that a lot of you represent smaller rural communities or locations that are not familiar with the FEMA process. We're here to help you. We'll have a question and answer session at the end of our presentation today to answer your immediate questions. But if we don't get to all of your questions, I can assure you we'll reach out to you and focus on your concerns over the upcoming weeks. If you need more assistance, we're certainly going to be here to help you. I'd like to introduce Audrey, our marketing manager and moderator for today's presentation. Audrey?
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad that everybody was able to join us today. Like Ted said, I'm going to be the moderator today, and be sure to leave comments throughout. Put your location in. We just want to see where everybody is watching from today. And also, we are going to have a Q&A at the end. So leave your comments throughout the entire webinar, and I'll be watching so that we can make sure to get to your question. After this webinar, we're going to provide you with a follow-up email, and it's going to contain the links to all the resources that we talk about today. And you'll also receive a recording of the webinar tomorrow. And we're going to try our hardest to get to as many questions as possible. But just in case we don't get to your question, you can schedule a meeting with us afterwards. And in that email you receive, you're going to get a link to a page that you can submit your request for a meeting. And thank you again, Ted, for kicking it off. I want to introduce the rest of our panelists. So we have Aaron Thompson, our Localgov contributor in Greenup, Kentucky. Hi, Aaron.
Hey, Audrey. Appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I come to the Localgov blog as a contributor. Previously, I worked as a director of special projects for a congressman here in Kentucky, and then also working as a field representative on behalf of the Kentucky governor and the Kentucky Department for Local Government. And I look forward to going into detail later about some of the federal appropriations and other measurements that have occurred to help local governments through COVID-19.
Thank you, Aaron. And we have Steve Price, FEMA disaster funding expert in New Orleans, Louisiana. Hi, Steve.
Hey, Audrey. Good to be here today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We hope this will be informative to you. I come to this organization as a partner with Localgov, and I come to you with 30 years of governmental experience. In the past 15 years, I moved to the private sector, basically working on disaster recovery in the New Orleans area, but throughout the country also. So we are able to help you get the monies that you deserve and try to get you as much FEMA reimbursements as possible. Great to be here, and I look forward to presenting.
Thank you, Steve. And we just got a question from Paul in Dayton, Ohio. So you can actually, if you look at the top of the bar, there's a chat box. And if you press more, then you can see the chat box and then you can leave your location in there. I hope that helped. And we have Tom Fagan. Hi, Tom.
Hi, Audrey. Thanks, everybody, for getting on to let us share this great information with you. I've been with ASAVAR and Localgov for 5 years. Started as a senior analyst. The majority of my career was with Xerox for approximately 15 years. I like helping municipalities maximize their revenue and develop their community relationships. And you'll be hearing from me later in the presentation. Thanks again for everybody being on.
And everybody's sharing their location with us. We have Joliet, Illinois, Aurora. We have New Orleans, Liberal, Kansas, Clare, Michigan, Athens, Ohio. We have people from all over the United States. Thank you so much for joining us today. And let's dive right into it. So Aaron, would you like to take the floor?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much, Audrey. Again, it's a real pleasure to be with you all today from across the country. I know things are a little bit different right now. I know here in Kentucky, this is typically the week where it'd be the lead up to the Kentucky Derby, and there'd be a lot of really cool things that are going on, but unfortunately that's been postponed. But we'll get back to moving with things before too awful long. Today, we really wanted to go into some detail with you all about the federal resources that have become available under the CARES Act and a couple different programs through the federal government to directly support you as local governments. A couple different initial federal action steps occurred prior to the CARES Act, which is something you've probably already heard about, but these were done prior to the president signing the CARES Act bill last month. And Audrey, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. The Families First Coronavirus Response Act was a bill that was passed by Congress, and this is important not only for you as an employer, but for businesses within your community. It requires sick leave or family medical leave for employees related to the coronavirus. And so this is specifically there in the law, expanding those sick leaves or FMLA circumstances. And a little bit further for businesses, there are tax credits that are available to help businesses with the funding of this sick leave if that is not something that they have the resources for. Now, on the local government side, there were no resources that were appropriated for that specifically, but you can definitely look at some of the other options that we'll talk about later as a way to potentially pay for that. Secondly, the Federal Reserve has announced some funds that are available under the Municipal Liquidity Fund. And basically, this is a fund where local governments and state governments both can assist with short-term debt through tax revenue and bond anticipation notes or other short-term notes. There are some stipulations on it as far as a population size, but there's some flexibility for state governments to help with smaller local government communities. So for both of these examples and the other ones that we'll talk about later in the program, we'll be sending information out about how to access more information about not only these funds, but some of the borrowing opportunities also. Moving ahead to the CARES Act, these earlier programs we talked about were ones that you probably haven't heard of before, but the CARES Act in particular, there's four programs that you normally are already most likely using as a local government. The Economic Development Administration was appropriated $1.5 billion through the CARES Act, and these funds are to help you go and look at opportunities that lie ahead for your community. A lot of communities have had circumstances where they've lost businesses or other industry through COVID-19, and there's going to have to be a response effort. These EDA dollars can be used to help to look to planning ahead on a regional basis to see what can be done for future job creation. The Community Block Development Grant Program was awarded $5 billion. This is something that if you're a larger community, you most likely already receive these funds in an entitlement form where you receive these funds automatically and you can spend them on community-related projects. And if you're a smaller one, that normally goes through a state-based agency through the governor's office. In Kentucky, it's through the Kentucky Department for Local Government, but you apply to them directly for funds. So $5 billion were allocated to the CDBG program. $2 billion will kind of go through this normal process that I just mentioned with the entitlement dollars or with the applying to your state government. And then the Department for Housing and Urban Development will be making additional determinations about the $3 billion. The third program that you might be familiar with is the Emergency Solutions Grant Program, and there's been $4 billion allocated to that. Just as I mentioned, the CDBG program, larger communities receive funds for this automatically through entitlement dollars, and then smaller communities can apply through a state-based agency. And so you probably already for CDBG and ESG have utilized these in the past and know the process for acquiring those. But in all of these circumstances here, there's extra money in the program to help with the needs directly to COVID-19 and just whatever else needs to be happening to support the folks in your community. The Burn Justice Assistance Grant Program, also referred to as JAG sometimes, $850 million was appropriated also as part of the CARES Act. Again, larger communities and receive funds directly from the Department of Justice, and smaller ones receive them through a state-based agency. So your finance officers and law enforcement folks probably already know these processes, but these funds are making their way out to your communities and can help with some of the cost associated with the law enforcement needs for your local government through COVID-19. And then lastly, the Paycheck Protection Program. You probably saw small businesses in your community make use of SBA dollars. And in 2 separate rounds, there's been nearly $700 billion that have been appropriated for these short-term forgivable loans for businesses that have under 500 employers. Last week was when that second round of appropriations were approved, but these can be utilized by your small businesses to basically help inmates make ends meet over the coming weeks through these forgivable loans. Normal SBA lenders are giving these funds out, but any FDIC institution can apply to the Department of Treasury in the Small Business Administration and be able to help appropriate these funds out to small businesses. And then we'll move ahead to the Coronavirus Relief Fund. And as far as the CARES Act, this was the part of the bill that really had a lot more funding and is a one-time appropriation, different from what we saw before for local governments. And overall, there was $150 billion that was allocated. And its sole purpose was to respond to the public health emergency on behalf of state and local governments. And there is a number of different circumstances here. You know, we've got the public health crisis, but we also have the economic crisis. And so this is a two-pronged approach to address the issues here. And as far as eligible expenses, and we'll go ahead and ask you to move to the next slide, Audrey. A couple different expenses can be utilized by this fund. Number one, medical. So for example, if your community needs to set up a facility to take care of COVID-19 patients, or if you need to set up a facility for testing of folks to make sure that they're getting tested, funds can be utilized and are in that medical expense category. The public health category is kind of anything related to communicating the public health order or enforcing the health order. So this is support to health departments and to other folks that are helping there. So this could also include just disinfecting of public areas, and then also the acquisition of medical supplies or PPE for any public-facing facilities. Payroll expenses, again, these are ones that if you've had staff that's had additional time where they've incurred additional cost as an employee, perhaps just directly related to COVID-19, those funds can be reimbursable through this payroll expense program. Fourthly, we have kind of the expenses of action to facilitate compliance with the health measures. And basically that means, for example, we have had high-risk individuals such as the elderly who have been forced to stay at home, and we've had students who have continued schoolwork, but they've had to do it all online. For some of these circumstances, to maybe provide meals to some of these individuals or to help with some of the technology needs for school districts, there's an additional cost. And this category allows for funds to be able to help with making sure that everyone's in compliance with the public health measures. Fifth, we see a specific example of economic support. And within this, there's a couple different categories. The one that really sticks out is being able to better support local governments. And so there's the capacity for local governments to support small businesses through a specific program that they come up with their own community. And then there's a last category for kind of miscellaneous. But overall, broadly, this program has a number of different resources that are flexible based upon your specific community and the needs that you have to be able to provide the services and help your community heal up from the crisis and making sure further things do not happen anymore. Now, to be really key with our funding and the stipulations here, it can only be for COVID-19 cost. No revenue request or anything else can be utilized through this coronavirus relief fund. And furthermore, a couple more stipulations. They were previously ones that you did not have anticipated as being a budget item. And then also they must have occurred between March 1st of this year and through December 30th. And Audrey, I'll ask you to go to the next slide. There's a few other examples specifically too. Damages covered by insurance, payroll or benefits expenses for workers whose duties were not dramatically different in regards to the crisis, and a few more there. But basically anything that is not directly occurring because of the virus is not going to be eligible under this program. Now, the biggest question you probably have is how do you get access to these funds? The law was written in a way where local governments with a population of over 500,000, and this could apply to either county or city governments, both, were able to receive direct payments. And then also state governments receive payments. And Audrey, I'll ask you to go to the next slide. Every state is receiving a minimum of $1.25 billion, with other states receiving more. I believe New York is in the $4.5 billion range. One of the states hit hardest, if not the state hit hardest by the virus. And there's a lot of flexibility that's left open to state governments. As I mentioned, the higher population communities can make their own decisions, but much like these other federal resources that we talked above, it gives the resources to the state governments and to the governors and to the executive branch of government that best understands how to appropriate these funds within their state. So we're starting to see some different information come out about how states are planning to allocate these dollars. Washington, who everyone knows was really hit first with the coronavirus, they are going to be, their initial plans that have been announced were $250,000 per every county and $25,000 per every city that could be used for those different expenses that we talked about. And while there's more details to announce, that kind of gives us an idea for what one state government is doing, and we'll see where that goes from there. A couple more, Missouri and Montana, they have both announced task force, but have not announced specific plans for how these funds will be spent. But overall, big picture, the thing is, a local government you can be doing right now is for all the different funds that I talked about here, for the expenses that you have, which pot of money will be something that you can apply for to be able to help with these costs to offset on your budget overall, because there are funds available in these different areas. And then lastly, overall, with communication, this is something that's very important for the state officials right now at the executive and legislative branches of government. How are they going to be allocating these funds out to local governments? And it's important that you give feedback right now to your city or municipal league, or if you're a county, your county association, so they can be advocating. And then also just be speaking to the congressional offices, whether they're a congressman's office or your senator's office, as they make decisions about further legislation. It's important that they have your feedback to know what resources can be provided or things should be considered to give you the flexibility needed to respond to the crisis. And lastly, the other fund that has became available through all this is the normal FEMA Public Assistance. And the president declared a national disaster with the public health crisis. And so Congress appropriated nearly $50 billion to the Public Disaster Fund. And I'm going to turn it over to Steve, who's going to go into that a little bit more detail and talk about how those funds can be accessed. Steve?
Thank you, Aaron. Thank everyone for being on the call and the video. And there will be some of you who are very familiar with the FEMA response, because like where I live, we deal with this every year where we have some sort of disaster. And some of you on the call have never dealt with FEMA. So bear with me. Some of the things will be redundant for those who are knowledgeable, and other stuff will be brand new for some of the new people. But as you're all aware of, the President of the United States declared an emergency on March 15th for FEMA to come in and help the local states, the local governments, towns, cities, nonprofits for what FEMA calls Category B emergency response expenses. Basically, that is anything that you do that you are responding to the emergency. And we'll go into that a little bit more. FEMA reimburses you 75% of those expenses, and that is a reimbursement program. So therefore, you spend the money first, and then you apply for the reimbursement through your state emergency management division, as most of you know about them. And that process begins, and then you wait for your reimbursement and you go through that process. One of the things that here's some of the items that we recommend you keep very close tabs on and make sure that you're documenting everything. One thing that they do allow is if you have emergency response labor, meaning your own employees are working the emergency. This emergency, first of all, is something that none of us have ever dealt with. This is throughout the entire United States, every state of the union, every municipality, every state, every city, every town, every different type of nonprofit organization all become eligible for this FEMA reimbursement program. So one of the things that you do is when you have employees who are working the emergency and other people are not, you may pay them some additional funds like overtime. You may pay them a stipend. You may give them different type of payments because they actually came back into work. That is the first item on the slide, where what we're able to do is help you to calculate all of the expenses that go along with that labor cost, whether it's their additional salary, their benefits, your payroll taxes, retirement, sick leave, whatever you provide for them is all included in this reimbursement labor calculation, and it's called force account labor, where FEMA uses that. That's one of the items. So if you are using your employees for responding, whether they're cleaning buildings, as an example, whether they're buying supplies, whether they're attending meetings that deal with COVID-19 pandemic, you can track their time, and then you can submit those times for eligibility reimbursement through your state and FEMA. Some of it will be agreed to by FEMA in the state, and some of it may not. The other thing we can do is we help you look at all of your costs that are related to the disasters, such as anything that you purchase. You may have purchased masks, gloves, disinfectant. It could be as much as software. It could be equipment that you have to provide now for people to come into your buildings. It could be computers that you're now buying because of the social distancing that has to occur. So now you have people that are using computers far away, and now they're accessing your different records and your permits and that sort of stuff. So these are things that we've never really dealt with before, but it seems like they're going to become eligible expenses that FEMA is going to go ahead and reimburse. The other thing that we're able to do is we're able to support your staff. As you know, your business continues on. Every day you have public works requests. You have to run your water plant, your sewer plant, your road department, your finance department, your payroll. All of those activities continue. So when I worked in government, most of the people that worked for us, let me say everybody, was already at their maximum capacity of what they could do. So now you're adding more work for them because somebody's going to track all this. Somebody's going to file the application to get reimbursed. Somebody's got to file what they call project worksheets, for those of you who have never dealt with FEMA. For every item, not every item, but different categories of items that you're going to ask for reimbursement. So it becomes a very paperwork-driven process. A lot of it's done online now, but you still have to have the backup and you still have to have the information upload and all that sort of stuff. And that's the things that we can do. We can augment your staff. We can help your staff as much as you'd like, as little as you like. We can give advice, or we can actually do the work for you. The other thing, as you've seen in the presentation by Aaron, is that we are looking at other available funds that are becoming very much available through the federal government for the COVID-19 pandemic. Funds that we've never seen before. We've never seen these type of bills like the CARES Act. We've seen something like it, but now because it affects the entire 50 states, every congressman, every senator is trying to help their constituency. So we're going to see things like we've never seen before. The people in government that I've spoken to have all had a fall off of their revenue stream because of the tax bases, because of the shelter in place, so to speak, the social distancing. So we've seen things that we've never seen before. So we're tracking all this as a group of companies to provide you sources that you can actually get money to help you get through these times. The last part of this that's important for you is the work that we do for you is called direct administrative costs. And that is reimbursable at the 75% rate that you get reimbursed from FEMA. Our costs are included in the project worksheet. Say, as an example, if a project is worth $100,000, they may add $3,500 to $4,000 to $5,000 for that. FEMA, when I say they, excuse me, would add that amount to that project worksheet for you to do a direct administrative cost, either with your own employees or with a third party private company like what we do. So very important. So if you spend $100, you'd be getting $75 back. You can go to the next slide for me, please, Audrey.
Is this slide good?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. I didn't see a change.
No worries, Steve.
That's all right. Some of the things that we've noticed, and I'm not going to read through these for you, you can read them, but I'm going to give you some examples of the things that challenges and opportunities with FEMA and the states that we've dealt with. And I've done this in Florida, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, New York, Nebraska, Carolinas. So we have a wide variety of dealing with the different state agencies as well as FEMA. The FEMA process is the same. But some of the things that in our 15 years of recovery for Hurricane Katrina, we have one client that we've been their project managers and their grants managers all the way till current today. We are still working on their grants processing. We are still doing what's called closeout for them. They still have active projects 15 years later. So given that this is a United States issue, FEMA is going to have depleted resources to work this disaster, just like you guys do, just like the local governments are overwhelmed with, okay, where do we go next? Well, FEMA and your states, the emergency management and everything is still going to have that because they, just like you, have to continue to work on the previous disasters, the hurricanes Michaels, the hurricanes Harvey. Lo and behold, we're still working on Hurricane Katrina. So we still deal with FEMA for Hurricane Katrina. So those resources really become tight and much more difficult to deal with. Lo and behold, we're heading into June and July, August, September, which for the coastal areas become a hurricane season. So if another disaster hits, you then have to deal with that disaster. And then the other thing that's happening right now is that the emergency period for you to get involved and for you to apply for your grant application becomes a 30-day period. Well, that's been extended right now. And right now the emergency period goes through the end of this year. So you have time to put all this together, to get your applicant in, to get your eligibility, excuse me, reimbursements. And then that in itself is going to help everybody. So that's a quick understanding of what we do, and there's a lot more that goes into it. We have to track all the funds you get, whether it's insurance, whether it's other federal funds, whether it's donations. You have to track all that to show FEMA that what you've gotten, they're not duplicating your reimbursements. So thank you, Audrey. I turn it back over to you and look forward to answering some questions.
Thank you so much, Steve. All right, we have some great questions. And the first one is from Kurt Jones. So Aaron, I think this might be a question for you. Kurt is asking, are there any funds available for revenues lost due to the virus? For example, since there's less driving, there's less revenue from traffic tickets. There's also less revenue from sales tax, etc. If so, which funds?
Well, thank you very much for the question, Kurt. And to be, the answer as of right now is no. The only funds that have became available are for those specific COVID-19 costs that have been incurred by the communities and what they're spending there. We did mention the municipal liquidity fund, which could be accessed, but that is more of a short-term borrowing process that could just help make ends meet. Now, there has been other discussions at the federal level for budgetary assistance from a revenue perspective for state and local governments, but that is something that has not came to fruition yet. So I would encourage you on that front to make sure you're talking with your congressional delegation and expressing your thoughts on that with them.
Thank you, Aaron. Okay, our next question comes from Donald Edens, and I believe this is a question for Steve. Would FEMA reimburse the expense to hire a grant assistant?
What FEMA would do, thanks for the question, it's a real good question. What FEMA will do is reimburse you for the hours that the employee spends directly on the COVID-19 disaster. So if your intent is that person is going to work on that 30 out of the 40 hours a week, and you can show that they're doing all of your documentation and all of your meetings and all, they're very specific, all of your meetings, but very specific tasks are recorded as to what they're reimbursed. And we can share that with you at any time. You can do it on FEMA.gov. They show you what's in there. It's called direct administrative cost. Hope that answered you.
Thank you, Steve. And I apologize if I say anybody's last name wrong. Our next question comes from Paul Grunner. He says, I'm an elected official. I'm paid a salary established by state law. I do not keep a time record of any kind. Can we get reimbursed for some percentage of my salary for time spent on COVID-19 issues? This might be a question for Aaron.
Yes, and so Paul, thank you very much for your question. Specifically in the guidance from the Department of Treasury, they say that payroll expenses for public safety, public health, healthcare, human services, and similar employees whose services are substantially dedicated to mitigating or responding to COVID-19 public health emergency are eligible through this program. Now, I'll say that, but what I would encourage you to do with your state specifically is make sure that you check with your state as they disperse funds about what requirements that they might have on top of that and just the process overall, because they will be outlining that specifically for your state to learn more about how it will apply to you. But that's the general framework. And, my understanding that would be local officials potentially could be in the similar employee category, because especially in some smaller communities, they're the ones primarily doing a lot of the work. So, but would encourage you to talk with that state agency that are executing those funds to make sure for certain.
Thank you, Aaron. And I think this is another question that you might be able to answer from Christina Rodriguez. She is asking, when saying other federal program, clarification that she needs is, would this also include grant applications from other funding sources that have opened up spending flexibility to help with COVID-19 expenses?
Yeah, so thank you for your question, Christina. And I think what you were asking there was, we've got the coronavirus relief fund that we talked about for the 5 or 6 different categories of direct COVID-19 expenses. And that category, those will go directly through that state-based agency that will be executing those funds for the coronavirus relief fund. And then on the other side, with what we talked about initially with the CDBG grant program or the Emergency Solutions grant and those others that we mentioned, you'll be going through the normal process with them. And you might have used those funds for a new fire department or for an economic development project or a few other things in those categories. And those processes will be the same as they normally are.
Thanks, Aaron. And this next question is going to be for Steve. So Penny Holler is asking, I'm working on multiple grants, FEMA, BJA, FTA. How should I account for my time to apply for reimbursement, done by time spent specifically on each grant?
Very good question. What you may want to do is track all of your time that you are working on anything that deals with the COVID-19 disaster. And then eligibility will be determined by your state and FEMA, whether it's reimbursed. But there is a good chance that a portion of that time would be reimbursed because you're working directly on the emergency and it's not your normal duties that you're working. That's kind of what they look for.
Thank you, Steve.
You're welcome.
All right, our next question comes from Deanna Barron. She asks, for fire departments who's staffed for increased EMS calls and also covered employees who were exposed on duty, would those be covered payroll costs reimbursable?
Deanna, this is Steve. Good question. We're not sure that's going to be covered as this point. I think this is going to be, as one of the things I didn't mention, as we all know, FEMA policy is very fluent. And when they have a disaster like this, they will have disaster specific guidance. And I have a good feeling that you are not the only person that's in that position throughout this country. So this will come up over and over again. And as it comes up, the more that FEMA sees that there's a need, they may be reimbursing it. But the general rule is that if they're doing work that is not in their normal duties, if they're doing above and beyond their normal duties because of the COVID-19, that's the piece of it that can be reimbursed. So you have to, I think you have a good case, but it would be something that's going to be determined on each individual applicant.
Thank you, Steve. And this might be a question for Aaron or Steve. It comes from Laura. She says, it was my understanding that only overtime costs were eligible and not regular time costs.
And so I can answer as far as from the Coronavirus Relief Fund. And I mentioned specifically the guidance from the Department of Treasury. And they did list those different categories in there. And with the previous example that we had of the elected officer where he was not, where he does not regularly do his time. I understand that could be something in the middle of the road, but the key point here is for the state agency that is executing these funds out in the state, once you see that announced, whether that be through your governor's office or through other local government agency, be sure to talk about that specifically with them and the guidance that they give, because there's going to be local officials from across your state that are in that category. In the guidance, they mention just payroll expenses, and then they also do mention overtime expenses also related to COVID-19. So make sure that you're talking with the state agency that are actually giving those funds out.
Thank you, Aaron. And another question for you, Aaron, from Elizabeth Smith. She is asking, can a municipality be reimbursed for employees being off work due to a family member being a having high-risk health issues?
Yeah, so thank you very much for your question, Elizabeth. And where we talked in the beginning about the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, that could potentially be in that category with an FMLA circumstance that requires employers to be able to do that. The bill did not provide any funds. The bill that required the FMLA for COVID-19 did not provide any funds for state governments or local governments for that. For the private sector, those are being done through tax credits. So as far as specific reimbursement for those expenses, I think it's still a question up in the air whether the Coronavirus Relief Fund would be eligible for that. My gut probably tells me that it would not be eligible. But again, with these other examples, as I've mentioned, make sure that you talk to the folks at your state government agency that will be executing these dollars. And I'm going to go ahead, Audrey. I see another question here from Ms. Frazier in Louisiana, and she's asking about these dollars and how they're going to be dispersed. And I'll go ahead and cover that because I know a lot of the questions are about the Coronavirus Relief Fund. We mentioned Washington, for example. They had the first wave of the virus, so they've had more time to kind of settle down to a state of normalcy and respond. I know Governor Edwards, John Bel Edwards, was at the White House yesterday with the president, and he's still in the active process of trying to get testing ramped up. So a lot of states are probably in different, they're in different stages of getting things set up for these funds. So be on the lookout, particularly from your legislative delegation and from your executive branch, because they should be announcing over the coming weeks how these funds are going to be executed. And again, that state-based agency that gives out your CDBG dollars or Appalachian Regional Commission or Delta Regional $40, that agency probably can give you a little bit more information right now as far as that timetable when you might expect more information on it.
Thank you, Aaron. So we have time to take one more question. And just remember that after you end this webinar, you will be redirected to a URL where you can just schedule an appointment with us. Whether you just have a question for one of our panelists, we can connect you with one of our experts here today, or we can do a 15-minute assessment of your potential funds that you can be reimbursed. And also, we are going to be providing a downloadable PDF of the presentation as well as a recording of the webinar. And in the follow-up email, we're going to provide links to all of the resources that we spoke about today. And the last question we have is from Anne, and she says, this is for Steve. She says, we are experiencing severe flooding in northern Illinois where we are getting flood response ready, sandbagging, etc., and having to call additional employees out. Will this be an additional FEMA reimbursement?
And thanks for the question. It's a good question. First of all, you have to find out if it's going to be a declared federal disaster. That's what kicks in FEMA. And if it becomes a federally declared disaster, which your local government would declare a disaster, the state governor would declare a disaster, then the federal government would declare a disaster. And it becomes a disaster, then FEMA would kick in. And yes, that is a very, very good reason why FEMA reimburses you for those type of services.
Thank you, Steve. And I am taking everybody's feedback. I see that we have requests to go into the FEMA reimbursement process in more detail. And so I will do that, and we'll provide everybody additional resources. And I'm going to hand it over now to Tom to wrap us up. Hi, Tom.
Hi, thanks, Audrey. So I wanted to talk a little bit about ASAVAR and Localgov as this comes up. We're a 360-degree maximization and compliance program that helps municipalities to recover funds that they wouldn't know is due to them. And then we have customer service that is our big differentiator in the market. We have a customer service department that'll help your municipality catch, collect, correct, and monitor your streams of revenue that is invaluable in this time of COVID. And in regards to the discussion that we had with FEMA and the CARES Act, what we do at ASAVAR with our Localgov platform is eligible for that in this COVID-19 time. So that is invaluable to you trying to get your municipality digital in this time when people can't go out of their houses to pay their dog walking license or their business license, etc. And then monitoring and management, this is our digital platform, which I'll elaborate on the next page. The next page, Audrey. So I'm going to go from the top right. I talked about our revenue review program. We have proprietary software that identifies gaps in remittances from providers, taxpayers, and we get that money back into your pocket. Then we have a tax and fee administration module. That's software that helps you collect these certain taxes or fees. And it takes the paperwork out of the equation for you, which ultimately brings money to your bottom line faster. Those stamps that you fill out that on the envelopes that you send out, that all becomes mechanized in our process. Revenue forecasting, we have an insights and analytics module that helps you forecast and budget for your next year. It takes all your sales tax data in a very relatively low cost application to graph it out for you to show you what you should expect year over year. And it compiles year over year so that you can see what your businesses are doing at a moment's notice. And like I said, our customer service is our differentiator. Within our local gov process, we can work on delinquency reports. We can work on reconciliation reports. It's all included in the price for as much as the municipality would like to use or not to use. We have 25 years of experience in ordinance development. So we have best practice ordinances in short-term rentals, in any utility as well, and we are happy to share that with you as part of our service. Disaster grant management, you just heard about that for the last half hour. Thanks to Steve and Aaron for that great presentation to give you an idea of where you can get those funds. And then short-term rental administration, it's a very big hot topic across the country. Short-term rental administration, there are 24 different platforms. You might think of Airbnb and Vrbo, but there's 24 different platforms, and we identify within your municipality or county all those entities and bring them forward to pay taxes per your ordinances. If you don't have ordinances set up, it goes back to our ordinance development. We have best practices to show you what's most current and get you most to your bottom line. And that's where local gov comes in to collect those taxes as well by taking the paperwork out of the equation. If you have any questions, I know Audrey is going to supply my email address, my phone number. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'll be happy to discuss what we can do and how we can do it. Thanks again for coming on, and I'm going to give it back to Audrey.
Thank you, Tom. And I just want to thank everybody that has joined us today. Thank you for your service. We're so happy that we were able to spend this time with you and answer your questions and provide you with information that was helpful. And I want to also thank Aaron and Tom and Steve and Ted for being on today. I really appreciate your time also.
Thank you, Audrey, for coordinating.
Thank you. And I have the link up on the screen right now. You can go to localgov.org/disaster grant writing. And then you can schedule an appointment. Just put a note in there if you want to meet with a specific panelist, or we will just follow up with you in an email and see how we can help. And thank you again. So we will also be sharing information on our next webinar coming up, hopefully next week. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.